Windows Server 2003 goes into support on July 14th, 2015, and you need to move quicker than an X moving out. In part 2, we discuss all the options, whether it's a data center refresh, moving your apps into the cloud, looking into a custom service agreement, or simply doing nothing. Stay tuned to find out the best option for you. So, like I said, we're going to go through a few of the plans. The first one is probably my favorite one. I love the first plan. It's what I call my Saturday morning plan, my Sunday morning plan, when I get home from work plan. Yep. And you call it?
My during the day plan.
So more appropriately,
it's the do nothing plan.
The do nothing plan, right? It's the plan we all follow most of the time.
Sure. And you know what? Ultimately, yes. Doing nothing is an option for you. You can legitimately choose to do nothing with the environment. Essentially, if you go through and you weigh the costs to mitigate and or migrate off of 2003, and you weigh the potential risks, if the potential risks are far less than that of the costs, maybe you do nothing. Maybe that's a part of your IT business strategy.
Some of us are actually okay with the do nothing plan.
Sure.
Maybe we're using these servers in a way that has them completely isolated, or and just they're not doing anything that anybody can access, and there could never be a problem with it. Although the word "never" in the IT world is kind of scary, right?
Sure. And realistically, that's going to be a little bit of a blended plan, because most organizations that still have 2003 in their environment are not going to be in a mitigated isolation type environment like that. They've still got their servers in mainstream production.
So you said isolation, right? So that's the other plan that we discussed.
Sure.
So there's the do nothing plan, which is do nothing.
Right.
Then there's the isolation plan,
which is really nothing more than the do nothing plan with some lipstick and earrings, right? For all intents and purposes, you're
prettier.
Yeah, just, you know, you're taking your 2003 server environments and you're going to isolate them either physically or virtually by VLANing them off. You know, maybe you remove the gateway for that VLAN so they can't, literally cannot get out to the internet. And so in that regard, you've mitigated some of your risk.
Arguably,
right?
Like
it's debatable
yeah.
That you have taken measures to mitigate some of your risk. But as we all know, all it takes is one point of failure or one point of access or one point of ingress.
and then boom.
And then you're compromised.
It's the do nothing plan that looks like I'm doing something. In all honesty, right, there are some of us, there's a lot of us that are going to do that. We're going to isolate these operating systems. And I think on the surface, you can say that you feel better because you've done something. It wasn't actionless. But I agree with you. Isolation, essentially saying I'm going to put these guys in their own little place so that if they do get compromised, it won't affect the rest of my infrastructure. The point is, you just had something compromised.
And what are those systems doing, right? Are they critical? Do they host any EPHI or any NPI?
What if they're doing my Active Directory and my name services?
Well, exactly. Maybe they don't have public information, or maybe they don't have sensitive information, but they provide supporting services to sensitive information. Whatever the case may be, there are still a lot of security implications there. And even more importantly, even though we've actually segregated the environment, we still have our support issues that we have to worry about. So
the third option that we have, Kevin, is the option that's obviously the one that we should do, right? Let's go ahead and call this one.
Fundamentally, it's the obvious choice.
It is. It's the do something one, right? We have the do nothing. Then we have the do nothing with lipstick, which I love that one, by the way. That's the one that you tell your boss that you're doing, or you tell your application provider or your other department that you're doing, and then we feel like we did some things, but you really only put baby in the closet, and that baby's going to grow up and be a big problem for you later, so face it, right?
Yeah, and most engineers and administrators recognize that that is nothing more than a Band-Aid.
It is, but how many Band-Aids do you and I run into that are 5 and 6 years old, right? So be careful of that, I guess, is the best piece. But the third one, the do something plan, essentially is upgrade your dang OS, right? Just do it, right? That's all I have to do, just show up, right? I just pop in a little ISO or a disk, and I hit play, and then boom, I upgrade my 2003 to 2012, right? It's that easy, isn't it?
Yeah, so it takes about 30 seconds.
And it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. You know what? So, frankly, yes, it is fundamentally and at the surface, it is the obvious choice. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of dependency checks and diligences that need to be performed, right? Are the applications in use even compatible in a newer OS version? What do we have from an inventory perspective? What are our workflows, and are they documented? Have we done our application dependency checks?
That sounds like a lot of planning, a lot of paperwork.
You know, it's funny. They say that 60 to 70% of any successful engagement is planning, right? And so you've got to go and calculate your costs versus your risks, you know, your TCO, your compliance, you know, potential liabilities, things of that nature, and then also take into account any network or hardware upgrades, your hardware refresh cycles as they stand anyways, and then of course hardware compatibility, like we talked about. Sometimes those legacy OSs and/or applications are not going to be compatible with newer versions, and vice versa.
If you have HP in there, HP has programs for their vendors that can help. There's even some pricing benefits. I think one of the biggest and most important pieces is the fact that you're going to have to invest in some infrastructure with 2003. That's why there's so much buzz surrounding this.
Absolutely, and that's why there's so much more entailed in the do something approach, right? It's not just as simple as, oh, a new operating system came out, so I'm going to take my desktop and I'm going to upgrade it from Windows XP to Windows 7. Unfortunately, it's not just that simple. However, if we don't do something about it now, we may still find ourselves in a need to do something about it later.
With even more costly scenario, right? That's really the lesson.
Absolutely.
And some of us might be avoiding it because of the costs with implementing the hardware that are associated with it. You know, that's an interesting problem. You got to kind of think about what scenario would put me in that place. If I'm virtualized to some degree, you know, maybe there's something else that can be done to resolve it. There's fewer and fewer folks out there that don't support virtualization from an application perspective. So there's a good chance that you can figure something out without buying hardware. But if you do, take advantage of the programs that some vendors put out there. The vendors are very motivated to assist getting us to the next level to get this moved over. If you wait until after 2003 in July 15th, all these promotions that you get from vendors like HP, they will vanish. What's the point at that point, right? So I think it's very good for someone to take a look at this from a planning perspective, because part of planning is what's the expense, right? How much is it going to cost me? Yep. A couple other options, right? Just to kind of ferret them out. We touched on one, a very expensive option. We'll end on that one because I think that's the one we're going to get a lot of questions on. The other one is cloud too. Won't spend too much time on that. Just quickly, you know, there are some programs out there that offer a lot of benefit.
Yeah, and you know, the cloud can even be kind of lumped into that do something migration kind of category because you're still doing something about your legacy OS.
And you're putting us in the right OS. You're not doing something to keep Frankenstein alive, right? To try to keep this old thing alive where the risk associated with it continues to grow and we continue to procrastinate it like a final exam at college, right? At this point, folks, the repercussions are much grander than that. And I think that that's something that's very important to keep in consideration. So there are going to be some of us that just can't, for whatever reason, right? Physics alone. My servers are on the moon, I can't get to them.
I have no hands.
You have no hands. No, but there are real ones too, right? Sure. Issues with application interoperability. So you have a vendor, the only vendor in the whole wide world that does what you need it to do, and you depend on them, and they're not ready to port over to the newer platform. You must have 2003. There's going to be some folks that have that, even some really big companies, right?
Absolutely.
So Microsoft has a program for that. If you give us a little bit of insight, and maybe you could tell us, do you think this is a small or mid-market program, or is it an enterprise program?
So it's definitely going to be more towards the enterprise market space.
And why would you say that?
Well, because of the cost involved. There is a substantial cost involved. You have to not only have a premium support agreement with Microsoft, you also have to enter into a custom support agreement. You still have to pay for each hotfix and/or security patch that is ultimately coded for you. And at the end of the day, Microsoft will not enter into an agreement with you unless you already have a mitigation plan in place to
So you have to show
migrate
some
off of
documentation.
2003. Correct. You're still going to have to show them that you plan
Sort of a
to move
reminder,
away
hey,
from
folks,
this.
This is only temporary.
Coming up next in part 3, we talk about best practices for a successful migration. Stick with us for tips on how to leverage your solutions provider to make sure the process doesn't sting.
My Saturday morning plan, my Sunday morning plan, when I get home from work plan, and you call it?
My during the day plan.
So more appropriately,
It's the do nothing plan.
The do nothing
right?
plan, right? It's the plan we all follow most of the time.
Sure. And you know what? Ultimately, yes. Doing nothing is an option for you. You can legitimately choose to do nothing with the environment. Essentially, if you go through and you weigh the costs to mitigate and or migrate off of 2003, and you weigh the potential risks, if the potential risks are far less than that of the costs.
Windows Server 2003 goes into support on July 14th, 2015, and you need to move quicker than an X moving out. In part 2, we discuss all the options, whether it's a data center refresh, moving your apps into the cloud, looking into a custom service agreement, or simply doing nothing. Stay tuned to find out.
Maybe you do nothing. Maybe that's a part of your IT business strategy.
Some of us are actually okay with the do nothing plan.
Sure.
Maybe we're using these servers in a way that has them completely isolated, or and just they're not doing anything that anybody can access.
Out the best option for you.
So, like I said, we're going to go through a few of the plans. The first one is probably my favorite one. I love the first plan. It's what I call